All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Jackson. I'm the Regional Vice President for Powermation, serving our regions 3 and 4, which is Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Powermation, I just want to give you a quick 10,000-foot overview. We're a technology and solutions focused distributor of automation and controls based in the upper Midwest. Since we were founded in 1961, we've maintained our position on the forefront of manufacturing, pushing ourselves daily to deliver innovative automation solutions with exceptional customer service. If this is your first experience with us, welcome. But please take a few minutes after our presentation to check us out at powermation.com. That's Power, M as in Matt, ATION.com. I want to introduce a few of the resources you'll be hearing from this morning's presentation. First is Lance Waffensmith. Lance is our business development manager for pneumatic solutions at Powermation. Lance has been with Powermation for 14 years, supporting motion control and pneumatic solutions. Lance will be primarily monitoring the chat window with me this morning. Our presenter this morning will be Steve Bain. Steve is the industry segment manager for food and beverage for Festo US. A chemical engineer by degree, Steve worked for Kimberly-Clark and Ecolab in engineering roles before joining Festo in 2011. Steve works on a national level as a primary interface between Festo employees and customers to discuss food applications and compliance with food regulations. He resides in Denver with his wife and 2 young children and enjoys skiing and hiking when he can find time. Now on to the reason you guys are here. This morning we'll be discussing the updates to the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, as it's commonly known. The Food Safety Modernization Act updated current good manufacturing processes when it was signed into law. This presentation is an overview from Festo perspective of the updated cGMP regarding equipment design and considerations of component selection for compliance. As we get started this morning, we will be recording this presentation. You can find all of the source material and handouts on the control panel on the right-hand side. And again, that control panel is where you'll also find the chat and question tabs to submit anything you may want to know more about. Again, thanks for joining us, and Steve, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a very important topic, and I think we have a lot to learn. So with that, I'll get going. So the FSMA is the Food Safety Modernization Act. This is part 1 of a 3-part series. Today is going to be a deep dive into the law itself about equipment design and what implications there can be. So why would Festo even be in a position to talk about this? Well, we're a pretty big company. We do about 3 billion euros annually. We're one of the world's largest supplier of automation components, but we're actually the world's largest supplier of automation components for the food and beverage industry by far. And so a lot of equipment manufacturers, most end users are very familiar with Festo. And with that, we do see a lot of applications and see a lot of different ways and how our components are used within the food industry. You might know us for our products, our air cylinders, our valves, things like that, but we're also the world's largest industrial training company. We do a lot of customized parts, and we have a lot of services like coming and doing energy audits and things like that. For the food zone specifically, we have quite a few products that are very well designed for cleanability, for hygiene, for some of the things that we'll talk about later, like having just food safe grease and things. So we have products designed for the food zone. We have products designed for the splash zone. We'll talk about what differences there are there. And then we also have a lot of products that are designed for custom applications, things that there's so many unique applications within food. It's hard to have catalog products that can fit all that. So we do a lot of custom design products for those applications. So with that, we'll jump right into it. A brief history of food safety laws in the United States. And the first one was actually in 1906. It was called the Pure Food and Drug Act. And this was the the first law that was largely steered because of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which was a book about the Chicago meatpacking industry, but it led to a public outcry about just like the ingredients that were being put into food and what was considered acceptable. And so with that, this law was the first that required accurate product labeling and prohibited certain ingredients. The next major law was in 1938 called the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And this was largely geared towards drugs as opposed to food, but it did create legally enforceable food standards. And then from a drug standpoint, this is when you needed pre-market approval for drugs before you could put them out on the market. This was also the basis for GMPs, or good manufacturing practices, and this is kind of where that started. In 1958, there was an important addition called the Food Additives Amendment, and it defined this list of food additives that are called generally recognized as safe, GRAS. And that'll come up later, because what that is when you hear of a product or an ingredient being FDA approved, it means it's on this list. And if it's off this list, then it's not FDA approved. And so this list also is largely designed to prevent cancer-causing agents from being used as food additives. In 1962, GMPs became a little bit stronger. They were republished. In 1977, they were updated again. And in 1986, GMPs were updated for the last time until FSMA went into place in 2011. So you think about from 1986 to 2011, what really changed with automation, the supply chain, like everything changed, right? We were starting to be able to import things safely because of better cold storage or high-speed production, or being able to get the same kind of fruit year-round as opposed to seasonally. So there's so many different things that changed. And so in 2011, Barack Obama signed the Food Safety Modernization Act into place, and this was a pretty big overhaul. Some of the driving factors for what really pushed it over the edge were that Americans were getting sick from foodborne illnesses frequently, 1 out of 6 every year. On top of that, 15% of our food supply was imported. And you think about like our laws versus wherever all this food is coming from, how do you control that? And then as our population ages, we have more people that are at risk of getting sick. And so I pulled this graph together recently, and we had a kind of a peak in terms of number of recalls in late 2016. It's been steadily decreasing since then. So it's still not perfect, but it does look like the industry has really started to embrace food safety in a better way. And so I see that as a positive trend. So when FSMA was put into place, there were 4 major themes. And this is a slide straight from the government. Their focus was prevention, inspections, compliance and response, import safety, and enhanced partnerships. From that, they created a list of foundational rules. And so this is, these were the 8 foundational rules, and you would think that, oh, I can just go read these. Well, it's not quite that easy. Those rules are sprinkled in throughout the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. So those are largely broken out into these categories. Our focus today will be on the first part of food and human consumption, and specifically these subparts. And then specifically this part 11740 is where it talks about equipment and utensils, but I kind of went through that today. Like, this is a small part of a very big plan, but it is important for what we do, and probably for what you do as well. So the import safety is what the government said was the most significant thing, and they're probably correct, because previously when you imported something, you had to, you're assuming that that product is safe. It might get inspected at the port of entry, and then at that point, it is what it is. But with FSMA, importers are now responsible to ensure that the foreign suppliers that they're getting the product from have facilities that produce in the same quality that a U.S. facility would. And they do that by third-party inspections. And so There's a bunch of third-party inspection companies that can come in, inspect a food facility, and certify it to whatever standard. You might hear some of these as like BRC is a common one. In the US, we have SQF. And so these certifications allow you as a importer to say, all right, your facility must be BRC certified, otherwise I'm not even going to consider you. And that's rolled all the way up into the major grocery store chains and retail outlets that won't even accept any ingredients or any finished products from plants that aren't certified. And in the end, what this is really doing is ensuring that food and ingredients imported from abroad are safe as if they're produced domestically. And we have seen pretty significant increases in this requirement and requests for this types of thing. Another major thing that was added was something called HARPAC, H-A-R-P-C. You're probably familiar with HACCP, and HACCP is HACCP, and that was where you would identify critical control points and then address the issue. Well, HARPAC doesn't think that's good enough. So not only have you identified the critical control point, you have to put in preventative control and then also monitor the effectiveness of that and then document that you're monitoring it. So it becomes much more preventative based. You can't just assume that the process you put in place is good. And so there's a lot of focus now on maybe automating some of that documentation, data logging, vision systems, things that can help alleviate, the old clipboard and the operator walking around taking notes. So we're seeing quite a bit of interest in that right now. And when does all this need to be implemented? Large facilities are required to start HARPAC by August 30th, 2016. So, I mean, realistically, almost every food factory in the country now needs to have these HARPAC plans in place. And you don't sense this everywhere, but it's supposed to be there. There's a few exemptions. I'm not going to get into that. But complying with the GMPs and then having a HARPAC plan is required for most facilities. The other thing FSMA did was allowed for FDA inspections, and so you as a facility can't refuse them. There's mandated inspection frequencies for high-risk facilities, and once the FDA is in there, they also have access to all your food safety records, and they're going to be able to access the records to confirm that you're documenting corrective actions, that you're verifying, if you said, hey, I need to make sure that there's no bacteria on the surface, that you're taking a swab, that you're documenting that there isn't bacteria, and that you're doing the things that you said you were going to do. And then another interesting thing about FSMA now is that the FDA can enforce a mandatory recall. Before, the FDA could tell you should recall a product and you could decline. And, as a company, you would weigh the politics and the finances behind that, but there were instances where companies would not recall anything. And I think it was for a drug, but the first mandatory recall went into place last year for some makeup that was coming in, if I recall correctly. But that is something that they're doing. But the interesting thing for food is under what conditions can there be a mandatory recall? And the definition is that where there's a reasonable probability that the food is adulterated under Section 402 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that part says that the food is considered adulterated if it has been prepared, packed, or held under unsanitary conditions where it may have been contaminated with filth, or it may have been rendered injurious to health. And so you think about that, you could have a facility that's just disgusting, but the actual food might be fine. But the FDA could come in and enforce a mandatory recall, even if the food is fine, just because of bad equipment design or because it wasn't designed to be cleanable. So keeping your facility capable of being clean and having your equipment designed for the food industry might be just as important as the production itself. And then another very important thing is that the Burke Doctrine is where the executives can be held accountable for problems with food production, even if the corporate official didn't know that there was a problem. And so, the fact that as a, let's say you're the VP of operations of a food production place, and all of a sudden you're releasing lots of product that has salmonella or other, problems, you could be held accountable even if you didn't have anything to do with it in the first place. And so there is definitely a better sense of, food safety is not optional. It's a critical part of what a company does. Along with the updated GMPs is also stronger language. So should was changed to shall, may was changed to must. And then they also added a lot of language around cross-contact and foodborne illnesses and allergens. Those topics weren't in the GMPs prior to this. So we'll get into one definition and then we'll jump into it. And that definition is, what is a food contact surface? So the FDA defines a food contact surface is a surface that contacts human food, or a surface from which drainage onto the food or onto surfaces that contact food ordinarily occurs during the normal course of operations. And we can compare that to European law, which is that food areas where machinery surfaces which are exposed to the food and from which the food or other materials can drain, drip, diffuse, or be drawn into the food or food container. So European law says, it's a food contact surface if it can drip into the food area. And the US law is where it ordinarily occurs during the normal course of operations. So US law is much less restrictive from that perspective. But if I was designing a facility or a new piece of equipment, I would probably design towards European standards anyway, from this perspective, especially if you're, a machine builder and you're shipping equipment to Europe. This is something that you want to do. So then CFR 11740 itself is broken out into these 13 laws. We're going to go through these one by one and talk about some of the implications with those. So the first one is called Design of Plant Equipment and Utensils. And it says all plant equipment and utensils used in manufacturing, processing, packing, or holding food must be so designed and of such material and workmanship to be adequately cleanable, and must be adequately maintained to protect against allergen, cross-contact, and contamination. So, what's kind of interesting about this is that, it doesn't say that your equipment needs to be clean. It says that your equipment needs to be designed to be cleanable. And that's a very different statement. It's saying that, the way that it's machined, the way that all the parts are put together needs to be capable of being cleaned. And, you see a lot of older equipment that maybe wasn't designed with that in mind. There's so many little things that you can do to, help make things more cleanable, whether it's even your tubing selection of having, tubing that's resistant to cleaning chemicals and is FDA approved. That's, it's really often an overlooked thing, but it's very simple. So from a Festo perspective, this is our lineup of tubing that we recommend for food industry. And so looking at like P1H tubing, it's FDA approved, resistant to cleaning chemicals. It's a good tubing. Hope we can get more aggressive where we need to. All right, the second law is design, construction, and use of equipment and utensils. And it says equipment and utensils must be designed, constructed, and used appropriately to avoid the adulteration of food with lubricants, fuel, metal fragments, contaminated water, or any other contaminants. So here's a picture of a spray can of food-grade machine oil. And this becomes very obvious to us that if I am adding lubricant to a process in a food factory, that lubricant probably should be NSF-H1 grease. What we don't often think about is what is the grease and the components that are coming on that equipment in the first place. Festo sells hundreds of different actuators. Most of our actuators don't come with NSF-H1 grease. Most pneumatic actuators in the market don't. But we do have quite a few actuators that do come standard with NSF-H1 grease. And, so where possible, especially over the food zone, we should be using products that have NSF-H1 grease. So if there is a problem, if there's incidental food contact, it's not a recall situation. It's acceptable. Next, installation and maintenance of equipment. Equipment must be installed so as to facilitate the cleaning and maintenance of the equipment and of adjacent spaces. So there's a lot of comments that the FDA had in the creation of this law. And I found this one interesting. They said, if the existing equipment is installed in a way that it cannot be cleaned, it would not have been in compliance with the existing cGMP requirements for the design and construction of the plant. So what they're saying is that there's no grandfathering. Just because you have old equipment that's too close to the wall for you to be able to clean behind doesn't make it acceptable. There's a lot of design requirements that you can put into place that make cleaning easier. And it's simple things like what is the proper radius of a corner, or are you avoiding areas where things can collect and puddle? Those are important steps. And a good example of that is our IP69K MPAC valve manifold. This was designed intentionally so that no matter what orientation you put it, there were no flat surfaces where things could collect or puddle. And so this is a really awesome product for the food industry, allowing you to take your valves, put them outside your cabinet, holds up great. But from a cleanability standpoint, very easy to clean. And it is IP69K, and we do that by having a redundant sealing system. So that outer seal, when you tighten everything down, the strain of the EPDM seal actually makes it really well enforced to be able to withstand that pressure. But even if there was a problem, we have a second seal inside protecting the electronics. And to my knowledge, we haven't had a field failure yet on any of these products, and that's pretty remarkable. And inside of these is just our standard MPA valve, so very robust, long life valve, really great product. The next one, corrosion resistant food contact surfaces. Food contact surfaces must be corrosion resistant when in contact with food. Sounds obvious, but how do you know? How do you know what that material is? How do you know if it's going to be resistant to your cleaning chemicals? And that turns out to be kind of a difficult thing to find for a lot of components used in automation. And at Festo, we try to be pretty transparent about that. So on our public website, you can find documentation. We call it our extended material information. We have this for most of our products designed for the food industry, where it goes step by step through every single material, what it is, and what regulations it complies with. Next is looking at these two cylinders. You can see that these are holding it pretty well. Well, this is the one on the left is our DSPF. It looks like an isoprofile cylinder because it is, but it has much better anodization. It has food grade seals. It has NSF-H1 grease. Very easy to clean. And on the right is showing our CRDSNU and operating after 6 months on a bleach filling line. So continually getting splashed with bleach, still holding up great. Next, food contact surfaces must be made of non-toxic materials and designed to withstand the environment of their intended use and the action of food, and if applicable, cleaning compounds, sanitizing agents, and cleaning procedures. So your food contact surfaces must be made of non-toxic materials, which we talked about earlier meant that it's on the GRAS list, so the FDA approved materials, and they have to be resistant to cleaning compounds, sanitizing agents, and cleaning procedures. And so, a good example here is, Festo has a lot of different seal options for our cylinders. Which ones are designed for food? These two. So these two seals are FDA approved, and they're also resistant to cleaning chemicals. The orange one we call our media seal comes standard on quite a few of our products. It's a good seal for most food applications. For very aggressive applications, we have what we call our A3 seal, and it's a UHMW seal that self-lubricates. And so this is great for applications where maybe you have to clean with the rod out, or maybe it's continually getting wet during normal operation, and so the grease washes off. Well, this seal allows you to keep operating even if that grease washes off. And we've seen up to 1 million cycles in these types of conditions. It's normally a very difficult thing to operate in. And so we have a pretty large range of cylinders that have this as a standard option. And the point of showing this is to kind of make it more apparent that you can take little steps to make your machine much better in terms of compliance and in terms of corrosion resistance and food safety. Next one, food contact surfaces must be maintained to protect food from allergen cross contact and from being contaminated by any source, including unlawful indirect food additives. So a really simple example here is showing our different cushioning options. So ignore the sensor spots, which is another point, but even that little screw where you would make that adjustment for the cushioning, if you were to use our PPS cushioning, that goes away. And what PPS cushioning is a self-adjusting cushion where as your loads change over time, or as your friction on the cylinder changes over time, it continually adapts. And it's a really great technology that I'd highly recommend you explore. It's actually less expensive than our PPV adjustable cushioning. And so with those things in mind, if you have an application looking at a new cylinder, this is a game changer in my opinion. And that PPS is available on a very wide range of products that we have. And a lot of those are also capable of having that FDA approved seal as standard. So again, it's something that we can do and work towards. I like this next one. So this one, seams on food contact surfaces must be smoothly bonded or maintained so as to minimize accumulation of food particles, dirt, and organic matter, and thus minimize the opportunity for growth of microorganisms and allergen cross contact. And a really good example of this is just your choice of fittings. So you take a look at the picture on the left, you have a beautiful machine, clearly designed well with sanitary welds, going to a custom end, and then a sanitary clamp with a custom cap, and that was tapped with an NPT thread, threaded with an NPT thread with some pipe tape. And so you go from this well-designed, well-thought-out machine to exposed threads, non-food safe pipe tape over the food zone. So in general, we highly recommend parallel threads such as a G thread for all your fittings and tubing in the food area, because a tapered thread by definition will have exposed threads. And there's a lot of other reasons to consider a tapered or a parallel thread instead of tapered. When you thread in a tapered thread, you're going to get debris that comes off that can either enter your process or maybe enter your pneumatic system. By definition, when you thread in a tapered thread, you're galling the threads, and so you can only take them in and out 3 or 4 times before you've caused enough damage that they leak too poorly. And then from a food safety perspective, again, avoiding that exposed thread is a really big deal. So don't think about your pneumatic selection as inch versus metric. Think about it as parallel versus tapered. Think about it as food safe versus non-food safe. And for that reason, we highly recommend looking at parallel threads. So for a Festo portfolio, highly recommend NPQH as kind of your go-to for the food environment, for non-aggressive environments, but you still need that FDA approved materials, that MSFH1 grease, and then our PUNH tubing. And kind of an equivalent flow control will be our VFOH for that. Then we have our NPCK fitting, which is a 316L hygienic fitting that might be paired with PTFEM tubing, and this might be better for high pressure washdown areas, things that directly over the food zone. And then for higher pressure, higher temperature, going back to the NPQH with PTFEM might be the way to go. And we have stainless steel flow control for that, CRG RLA. I think this one might be the most interesting one for me. So this one is called construction of equipment. And it says equipment that is in areas where food is manufactured, processed, packed, or held, and that does not come into contact with food must be so constructed that it can be kept in a clean and sanitary condition. And you start to think about this. What equipment are they referring to? So we're not talking about the machinery that's making the food. We're talking about possibly further down the line. Maybe we're talking about case packers or palletizers. Is that machinery so constructed that it can be kept in a clean and sanitary condition? It doesn't say you actually have to have it clean, but that it could be. And so I think we're going to continue to see more demand for easier to clean packaging equipment, especially kind of right after the primary packaging. So like your labelers, your case packers, track weighers, things like that are going to need to be easier to clean. And so this picture is just showing our ELGA F1 actuator, which looks just like our normal ELGA, but it gets rid of the sensor slots, has FDA approved bell, and it's FH1 grease. Like, this isn't really designed for the food zone. This is not something you'd want, directly over, open meat production. But this is designed to be easier to clean. And so, looking at a palletizer or a case packer and incorporating this might be a very smart way to go. Sanitary wipe down type things. We also have options for our ESBF ball screw actuator to be able to get FDA approved seals and FH1 grease. You can pressurize the body of this to keep ingress from happening. So really thought out products for this type of environment. These next couple don't have as many implications for Festo, but we'll go over them because they're there. So holding, conveying, and manufacturing systems, including gravimetric, pneumatic, closed, and automated systems, must be of a design and construction that enables them to be maintained in an appropriate, clean, and sanitary condition. And so I've been in a lot of food factories, and you start looking at all these like long piping systems, especially like pneumatic conveying or chain systems, and you have all these, and I've never seen one disassembled. Not saying that they don't, but how many of these things might need to be starting to consider ways of cleaning them out and verifying that they are clean. Next, each freezer and cold storage compartment used to store and hold food capable of supporting growth of microorganisms must be fitted with an indicating thermometer, temperature measuring device, or temperature recording device. So installed is to show the temperature accurately within the compartment. So this is where that data logging starts to become more into play. So instead of having an operator or technician walking by and manually logging the temperature of the freezer, that they just have automated data collection going. That is a major trend, and I think we'll see more of that, of taking that data, putting that into the cloud, so that as an importer, that you're looking at all of your different suppliers and you can validate that all their data is flowing in correctly. Those are definite trends that we're seeing. And with that, how do you measure that data? So this picture is showing our Festo CPX manifold, and we can take in RTDs. We can take in 4 to 20 or 0 to 10 volt inputs to be able to log that data. So this law says that instruments and controls used for measuring, regulating, or recording temperatures, pH, acidity, water activity, or other conditions that control or prevent the growth of undesirable microorganisms in food must be accurate and precise and adequately maintained in an adequate number for their designated uses. And so as all these sensors come into play, they have to be correct. And then this is the last law. Compressed air or other gases mechanically introduced into food or used to clean food contact surfaces or equipment must be treated in such a way that food is not contaminated with unlawful indirect food additives. And this is probably the most disappointing one to me, because that law doesn't really say anything. I mean, if you're going to have one of your 13 laws really break out compressed air, it doesn't give you any more information than the previous ones did about unlawful food additives. And The comment's really interesting. They said some comments assert that we need specific standards and quantifiable guidelines for compressed air. We agree that specific standards and quantifiable guidelines for materials such as compressed air could be useful. However, we disagree that such standards and guidelines need to be included in the rule. The rule is intended to establish procedures rather than to set standards for specific levels of contaminants in specific raw materials and other ingredients. If a facility believes that its use of compressed air should be addressed in its food safety plan, then it should do so, which to me also means that if a facility doesn't believe that its use of compressed air needs to be in the food safety plan, then it doesn't need to worry about it. And you know, there is a lot of confusion about this topic. There's various guidelines around the world that people can kind of look at, but there's no hard standard, there's no firm laws. And unless you're, you know, a Fortune 500 food company that has their quality department has gone in and evaluated all these things and has created various standards for different products, you're kind of just left without knowing what's acceptable and what's not. So fortunately, our friends at SQF, who are one of those third-party certification companies, in their guidance documents, they listed out that the recommended final stage of filtration in food contact areas should have a rating of 0.01 micron with an efficiency of 99.999%, and that is at point of use. That this is kind of their minimum recommendation. And again, you know, they're not going to be held legally responsible for this, but it is at least something that you can lean on if you're trying to define your own specifications or don't know where to go. This is probably where I would lean towards. Festo's 0.1 micron filter has another 9 on that efficiency, so we're good to go there. And so what we did is we created a bunch of standard air prep units that meet various air quality classes, and these are all to ISO 8573. So this talks about how much dirt, water, and oil is present in the air, but every single one of these has a 0.01 micron filter. So hypothetically, you know, every single one of these is in compliance with SQF guidelines, but if you need more stringent requirements for your particular product or your quality department has defined standards, these are all designed to be ready to go off the shelf to meet your air quality requirements. Every one of these has things like red green gauges and a lockable regulator so that you can you know, put this on and have it be, you know, TPM friendly, operator friendly. The filters pop up and down when they're full. And you know, so with that, you know, Festo really does have the complete portfolio for the food industry, from air prep to clean design actuators to our wash down valve manifold, to fittings and tubing and process valves and network valve manifolds, you know, for controlling their process valves. It is a pretty broad portfolio. A lot of care and attention has been made to compliance with local regulations and trying to really lead the industry in terms of compliance. With that, we have some support documents. We have a guideline for the Food Safety Modernization Act. Sorry about that. So we have some support guidelines for the Food Safety Modernization Act. And so this is a pre-brochure that just kind of goes through your, through kind of what we did today. So this would be a great document for maybe talking with your teams about what the laws actually say and different perspectives on it. We have white papers for food safety. We have a white paper for air quality. We have a guide to perfect compressed air preparation. And this is a, just kind of goes through those air prep units. And then we have also a guide to recommended products. So we have, you know, Festo has 30,000 products. If you're going to build a new food facility or retrofit an old piece of equipment, you know, what products would you want to use? This guide goes through those products just the newest products specific to food, notes about where they should be used. And the goal is to help you reduce kind of that scope of everything Festo down to, hey, these are the ones that we should be looking at. So some final recommendations. One, request actuators with unsufficient grease, especially in the food zone. Two, request products with FDA-approved materials. Three, standardize on M threads and G threads. So, looking at avoiding tapered fittings. Four, request products with reduced cracks and crevices, clean design. And last, request Festo. Festo does have the best portfolio for the food industry. So that's kind of the end of this presentation. Before we get to the questions, we do have two upcoming follow-up presentations. First one will be on July 30th, and it's going to be looking at, all right, if you were to take these steps to make your machine more compliant, use better products, things like that, what additional benefits do you have just beyond compliance? So things like better OEE, maybe better machine performance, energy savings, and talk about ways that those can be incorporated. And then on August 4th, looking into really deep diving into that product portfolio. Yeah, what are some of the features? What are some of the options? And if you're really going to be shopping for Festo product and trying to incorporate these into your equipment, what things should you really be looking for? So very deep dive into Festo, also really getting into air quality. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Steve, thank you for that. One of the questions that got sent to me was around responsibility and where that line stops. Obviously the end users are responsible for producing product in a compliant atmosphere. Does any of that push back onto the OEM system integrator? You are muted, Steve.
Got it. That's a great question. So in the US, the end user is ultimately responsible. Now, if the OEM didn't use FDA-approved materials, they said they did, that's, I think, where liability could fall back on the machine builder, if the end user were able to discover that. But the interesting thing is in Europe, it's actually the machine builders that are liable. And so in Europe, machine builders go through very extensive lengths to make sure that they have, and by law, they have to have this, like a documentation of how to clean the machine. And so the purpose of that is that if the end user follows those instructions to the T, and there's still a problem with the food that comes out the other end, that ultimately falls back on the machine builder.
So it's similar to general machine safety guidelines that the machine builder does have a sense of liability, especially in the European marketplace.
Exactly, yep.
Is there are there any areas where the U.S. is more restrictive in the legal guidance and the law than Europe, where if an OEM designs a machine to European standards, are they 100% compliant in the U.S., or are there areas that they should pay attention to?
I don't know of any, that's a really good question. I don't know of any requirements that are less stringent in Europe than the US. I take that back. Like there's a few industries that are kind of weird. Like the egg industry, as an example, isn't considered a food production environment in Europe. So their machinery isn't designed for wash down, isn't designed for food safe things. So there's a few industries that are kind of strange like that. The pet food industry in the US, we bring in ingredients that have salmonella. It's expected that your ingredients are full of bacteria, and then you work around that. In Europe, they bring in ingredients that already have all that bacteria killed. So the requirements are different from that perspective. But outside of a few things like that, I'm not really aware of too many.
Okay. For those in attendance, the chat window, we have that open, as well as the question window. If there's any questions you may want to submit there. Give people a minute here. Not seeing any, Steve. And I think that probably goes to the detailedness of the presentation. So thank you very much. Again, for those of you that are attending today, we do have parts 2 and 3 of these Food Safety Modernization Act and Festo presentations. Part 2 will be next Thursday. Part 3 will be the Tuesday following. And the reason that it's on Tuesday instead of Thursday is that Festo is actually having an online tech fair, essentially. I believe the dates are August 5th and 6th. You can find that information on powermation.com. So unless there's any other questions, thank you all for attending today. Steve, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thanks a lot.